Y'all remember when the whole internet got in an argument about whether or not they'd rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear? Well, according to Wikipedia, it all started from a TikTok video where an interviewer went around and asked 8 women, and 7 of them answered bear. You might have noticed that people had pretty strong opinions on this one, but that's not you. You're the calm and rational type. What should we think about this anyway? Well, let's talk about that. So, this is part of a broader idea I've had for a series on the channel where we do like a take on the iceberg concept. If you're familiar at all with the iceberg concept, people stair-step through the different levels of depth on a topic. The beginning being kind of like the surface level that a lot of people might know about, and the bottom being the deepest and darkest part that only the select few are aware of. My idea was I thought it would be fun to go over popular social issues and start off with the surface level being like the simplest and most popular takes, then gradually go deeper, increasing the amount of nuance. So starting off surface level, then working your way down to introduce some depth, then maybe for fun, introduce like a bit of a conspiratorial edge, right? And then at the very bottom, the actual best, most nuanced and informed take that I can come up with at least. So, pursuant to that, today's topic, the bear question. And I figured what better place to talk about it than in the middle of the woods, alone. So what are the 2 surface level takes of whether you'd rather be stuck in the forest with a man or a bear?
First, why would somebody choose to be stuck with a bear?
Man bad. This is probably entirely unsurprising, but the reason that people pick the bear is, well, I'll let these 2 explain.
Okay, if I'm like, oh, my friend here wants to talk to you, you're like, he
God! Easy! Good God! God, continue. Let's just continue the story.
No, what do you think you were implying with the Polaroid pictures?
That you're gonna murder him.
That's not as bad,
God.
debatably.
Going back to Wikipedia, 1 in 3 women is the victim of either redacted or physical violence during their lifetime. Contrast that with, there have been 664 bear attacks over the last 15 years, with most being non-fatal, which makes bear attacks far less common. And this part is back at the top of the Wikipedia page, but it flows better this way. One of the main reasons why they chose this answer was that men are able to commit redacted against women, and other popular arguments include that bears are unable to commit acts worse than murder, that they are more predictable, and I had to read this one, and that they treat women as people. That's a thing somebody said out loud. But yeah, the surface level to choosing the bear over the man is simple. Man bad. And to be fair to this take, man indeed do be pretty bad sometimes. And remember, we're saving our nuance for later, so don't get angry at me just yet. So, moving on to the other take, who chooses to be stuck with a man? If you have ever been with any group of guy friends to a zoo, you know it's only a matter of time before we start talking about which animals we think we could take in a fight. This subject of conversation is so popular that there was a poll done that went fairly viral. A couple thousand people were asked what type of animal they thought they could take in a fight if they were both unarmed. This resulted in a hilarious number of people saying that they thought a rat was going to get the best of them. And on the flip side, an absolutely insane number of people who believed that they could beat an elephant in a hand-to-hand fight. I can't remember the exact numbers. Hold up, let me grab. 8% of people, which out of the 1,224 Americans polled, that's 98. Quick napkin math, this one with me, all right? So how many people were in your high school class? For me, that was about 200. That means that 16 of them think that they could take an elephant. But that's unrelated. Moving on. But the reason I bring this poll up at all is that out of the roughly 3,000 total people polled, do you know what the fewest of them said they could take? A grizzly bear. Well, it's actually a bit of a toss-up between a lion, a gorilla, a bear, and an elephant, but the point stands. People agree that in an unarmed match against a bear, their chances of winning are basically zero. So, what's this position? The people who stick to be stuck in the woods with a man are effectively saying, I'd rather not fight a bear. So, you might be thinking, but John, these are straw men. And you're right. That's the whole point of the exercise. These are the surface level takes. Now, we'll step down and introduce some nuance. So there's 3 key areas of nuance I'd like to go through. 1, statistics. 2, experimental conditions. And 3, the depth of how bad we're talking. Those all make sense in a bit. It's a pretty place to sit down. Maybe over here. Let's start off with experimental conditions. So, you might have noticed that when we were talking about that poll, they established that we were unarmed and that we were beating the other animal in a fight. So those are the relatively simple bounds of our experiment. In the stuck in the forest example, things aren't all that clear. We don't know what sort of forest we're in. What does stuck mean? Do we know that we're gonna encounter the bear or the man? There's a few key conditions that aren't really discussed, and we would need to know those to be able to make a actually informed opinion. Next up, of course, is, are we armed? It's pretty clear from our old poll how most of us think we would fare against a grizzly if we were both unarmed. But if both parties are armed, that changes the entire scenario. It's also decent to think, what type of bear are we talking? There's lots of different ones and lots of different answers. How do we select the bear or the man that we'll be stuck in the woods with? That's a decent question as well. Is it a random selection from the entire population, or is it someone who chose to be there? And that plays pretty well into our next section on statistics. All right, we're gonna cover statistics inside because that makes a little bit more sense. Now, what most people ended up arguing about when they talked about this subject was statistics. People jump straight to their favorite numbers as if they mean something in a vacuum. But really, we need to first establish, to get the best good faith understanding that we can, what question are we asking? The trick to statistics is you can get them to say pretty much anything you want them to. It's all a matter of framing, but they're an extremely useful tool when you approach them properly to give us things like, the realistic chances of outcomes. So for the sake of this example, I think we can boil it down to about 3 questions that we're asking. And it ends up being a bit of a logic tree flow where the answer to each one decides whether or not the next step even matters to us. So starting off, likelihood of encounter. A lot of people probably assume this one as 100%, but it's not super clear in the context, and I'm gonna go ahead and include it, and that'll make more sense later. Next, we have the likelihood of predation. So if the 2 parties encounter each other, how likely is a conflict? And then finally, in the event of a conflict, how likely is the success, survival, desirable outcome? I guess I could color code all these. Should be pretty straightforward. Green, good. Wait, hold up. There we go. So the questions that we're trying to answer with statistics would be these. How likely is our encounter? How likely is a conflict or predation in the event of an encounter? And then, in the event of a conflict, how likely is success? And with these questions in hand, we can go actually try to gather information to make an informed decision. There's a couple more things in statistics that get really commonly mentioned in this debate. Let me read about them in the script to remind myself of them. People be screaming outside. A bear?
While we're in the statistics section, there are two really common fallacies that get discussed in this bear-man problem. The first being the base rate fallacy. That's the idea that we ignore the general statistics or the base rate at which something occurs in favor of something smaller and generally much more vivid. A great example might be freaking out over plane crashes, which are rare, but not being very afraid about texting and driving, which is common and deadly. In this context, we're talking about the per encounter risk of predation. The next one is it's the confusion of the inverse? Yes, the confusion of the inverse fallacy or conditional probability fallacy. This is the idea that you know the probability of A given B and assume that you can swap them and know the probability of B given A. The classic example given for this fallacy is in false diagnoses, the rate of false positives in medicine. The probability of A given B, we know that if someone has cancer, they're likely to test positive. That does not also mean that if someone tests positive, they are more likely than not to have cancer. In our example, confusion of the inverse is, yes, most violent crimes are committed by males, but that does not mean that most males commit violent crimes. On to the next section, let's get back outside.
The last piece of nuance isn't really a question, more a explanation and a belief structure. Those of you returning probably know that you weren't going to escape without me talking about some sort of philosophy. And it goes back to the surface level of the choosing to be stuck with a bear take. They're like written on the Wikipedia page. They talk about how, the worst a bear's going to do is kill you. Not entirely true, but still, roughly speaking, that's about it. The actions of the bear are going to be instinctual, opportunistic. A bear can't really be malicious as far as we know. So when I say the depth of bad, I'm being fairly tongue-in-cheek on purpose. It is a valid and true condition of this experiment and a valuable belief about the world to understand the difference between the instinctual, opportunistic actions a bear might take against you and contrasting those with the capacity for malice and what people call evil that man is capable of. Regardless of our positions on the subject, we can all agree that the worst things any of us can imagine are probably going to come from a man. This isn't to be misandry, more misanthropy. This isn't saying that this is some feature unique to man in context of sex or gender, but no, a feature special to humans. So, given our 3 bits of nuance, what do we think the best take would be? Now, the savvy amongst you might be wondering, Jom, didn't you say you were going to do the conspiracy section first and then the best take? To which you'd be correct, but I just thought it'd be more fun this way. It'll make more sense in the end, I promise. You might also be thinking, man, this really looks like a different location, and there's an awful lot of road noise for being in the back of the woods. To which I say, yeah, look, it takes a long time to make these. I don't know what... One of the perks of our change of scenery is now we get to have visual aids. Well, so, there are 3 important questions we need to ask ourselves about our experimental conditions for our best take. First, do we know for sure that we're fighting? Second, how do we select the participants? And third, are we armed? So, I made a graph. Let's find a way to get this stood up. I hope this is the production quality you're all here for. If the chart doesn't make it obvious enough, this is all the combinations of all of the answers to those binary questions. Let's start off with, do we have to fight? This is probably the most important question, because if we know that this is the Thunderdome and our chances of encounter and predation from our little flowchart earlier are locked to 100%, then that changes our decision making a lot. If we don't know for sure that a fight's gonna happen, then that changes everything. We get to think about the intentions of both parties. Things like escape, evasion, or even cooperation become options. Next, how do we pick the person or the bear? The binary options that I'm assigning to this question are natural or random selection, which, yes, natural selection is a pun, but this basically means the person or the bear that you're encountering is supposed to be there. They chose to be there, it's their natural environment. It matters a lot less for the bear, so we'll knock that out first with some bear statistics.
It's me, Indoors Jom, again. There's a lot of statistics that I should want to read the numbers out of, and it just makes more sense for me to read it off of the computer screen, so here we go. Global wild bear population by species. The American black bear is by far the most numerous. Its population is estimated to be about twice that of all other bear species combined. By comparison, brown bears, including grizzlies, are in the order of 110,000 worldwide, roughly 18 to 20%. Polar bears number around 25,000, approximately 3%. The remaining species are far less common. Asiatic black bears, roughly 50,000 or 5%, sloth bears, 20,000 or 2%, sun bears, 10,000 or less than 1%, and spectacled Andean bears, less than 20,000, giant pandas, 1,800 in the world. Drop bears are not included in this count. Now, the age distribution of wild bears, roughly 10 to 20% at any given time are young cubs, sub 1 year old. 20 to 30% are sub-adults, adolescents and a few years old, so smaller. The remaining roughly 50% are adult bears. Truly elderly bears near the upper end of their lifespan, greater than 15 to 20 years, are very rare, only a small single-digit percentage. The gender balance of wild bears is roughly 50 to 50, born at about a 1-to-1 rate. So what that all adds up to and means to us is you got a 50-50 chance of getting a male or female bear. If you run into a younger bear, you're probably going to run into its mom as well, so that's potentially more dangerous. So when we're talking about how we select our bear, random versus natural isn't going to be that crazy a difference. There's a small chance that you'll get really unlucky with a polar bear. That's about it.
If our participants are selected naturally, then we're getting a human who chose to be out in the woods, or at least is supposed to be there. This is going to include hikers, hunters, even military personnel on recon, things like that. But absolutely my favorite part of this question is, what if we pick the human randomly? See, the setup does specify that this is a male being selected, but it doesn't specify how old they are or where they're from.
Human populations by age and country. About 25% of the world's people are children under 15 years old. Roughly 65% are 15 to 64 working age adults. Around 10% are 65 or older, and that means that roughly 1 in 4 humans is a child, 2 in 3 are adults, and 1 in 10 is a senior. Now let's look at country of origin. There's about 8 billion of us, and India and China together each account for about 17% of the world's population, about 1.4 to 1.46 billion each. The United States is at a distant third at roughly 4.2% or 340 million people. Next we get Indonesia at 285 million, Pakistan at 3%, 241 million. Other populous countries include Nigeria, Brazil, Bangladesh, Russia. But at that point, we're all looking at 3% and lower. The point I'm trying to get at here is if it's a random selection of any human male, you've got a pretty good chance at ending up with like an Indian or a Chinese kid out in the woods with you.
And the final and easiest question is, are we armed? Do we get a gun? Now I'm going to keep this simple and fair. If we get a gun, the bear does too, but this isn't Fantasyland, they won't know how to use it. But yep, do we have a gun? Pretty simple. Don't think that one needs much explanation. Well, let's get this started. Scenario 1. We know we're fighting, the participants are selected naturally, so they're supposed to be there, and we are armed. What do we pick? Drum roll, please. Oh god, don't knock over the tripod. Bear. a armed man who knows what he's doing in the woods is far scarier than any bear. I don't think that one's too controversial to go over, especially because it's established we know we've got to fight. Even if you're also armed and also know what you're doing, taking your chances in a gunfight is far stupider than shooting the bear. All right, next, we know we're fighting. Natural selection still, the participants are supposed to be there, but this time we're not armed. If I have to fight a bear unarmed, I'm probably gonna lose. Back to our surface level, I'd rather not fight a bear. Now, this isn't necessarily like a good scenario. Look at me, I'm not gonna win either of these. I just think I have a better chance of winning this one. Any other human that chose to be out in the woods with me is just as dangerous as I am, and if they've taken like one jujitsu class, I'm done. So this is a bit of a coin flip. My chances are probably a little bit better with the man, so I'm gonna go that way. But next up, what if we select the participant randomly? Look, I'm not proud of it, but if we know an unarmed fight is coming, I'm taking my chances against the Indian kid. And there's just no way I'm taking the like 5% odds of rolling a polar bear. Moving on to the final one where we know we're fighting, selecting our participants randomly, but we are armed. Oh, that came off weird. Bear. This one might be a little bit surprising, but let me explain my thinking. The chances that you're going to roll a human that knows what they're doing with firearms is extremely low. But the absolute worst case envisionable in this scenario is being hunted by some tier 1 operator who happens to also have Jeffrey Dahmer's morals. Avoiding that scenario is worth it basically every time. There's a non-zero chance that if I choose human here, I'm gonna end up on the other side of Shane Gillis's Gay Vikings joke.
Oh,
And in that case, even though I can't believe I'm going to actually make this joke. So in this case, even though we know that Apu probably isn't going to figure out how to use the Glock, I'm going with bear again. But now, onto the final category. That closes out the last of our scenarios where we know we have to get in a fight. What happens when that's not a guaranteed condition? This is where most of the arguments probably live online. Given everything we've talked about, what did I think was the best choice if it's not guaranteed that we have to fight? Well, spoilers, it was all man. Let me explain. The second that it's no longer guaranteed that we have to fight, the intentions of the other party come into question. The best evidence that we can find is global statistics on per encounter instances of predation by men or by bears.
Okay, let's talk about human-to-human interactions that turn violent. It's estimated that the average human has just over 80 interactions per day. Violent encounters are exceedingly rare in percentage terms. For example, oh god, how many zeros is that? One analysis in the US calculated roughly 0.0000043% of random male-female encounters results in murder or redacted, which then makes that about one violent incident per 23 million interactions. Okay, let's hop over to bear encounters. Almost all encounters with wild bears end up without aggression. Bears typically flee or observe without attacking. Well over 99% of human-bear interactions do not turn violent. Estimates put the risk of an attack at 0.01% or less. So if we don't know that we have to fight, your per encounter risk of predation for a bear is about 1 in 11,600.
Encountering a bear is somewhere between 150 to 15,000 times more dangerous than encountering another human. This is exactly what the statistics articles were talking about with base rate fallacy. Even though our numbers are much higher quantitatively, they're drastically lower per encounter. Natural versus random selection doesn't make a huge difference here. All bear interactions are basically in the woods, so that doesn't matter to us. Being armed doesn't particularly matter in these instances, with one exception that I thought of. If you are in an area where it would be illegal for the human to be carrying a firearm, then that is meaningful data. Now, the one thing we know about them is that they're willing to break the law, and in that case, maybe it's worth hopping over to choosing bear. In all other scenarios, especially in the natural category, in the part of the world that I'm from, it's normal to run into other armed people in the woods. And whilst I respect that people might not be comfortable with that, these two scenarios where the person chose to be out in the woods are probably the safest scenarios on this entire board. I'll talk about why more later. See, I've seen these examples of people going through this question posed to a father. Would you rather leave your daughter alone in the woods with a man or a bear? It's understandable for it to be a challenging question to answer. Going with the most conservative numbers in favor of the pro-bear camp, we're still looking at the bear encounter being about 150 times more dangerous. So this makes it a textbook example of the base rate fallacy, the vivid and scary outcome of the bad that a man can do. Whilst it's understandable that that would be a reason to have an extreme aversion to selecting man, that puts you in a scenario where you're selecting something that is at minimum 150 times more likely to result in violence. That also kind of lumps all of our human violence statistics together into one bucket where they don't belong. Imagine, for the sake of this example, even if we know that the other person's a murderer, we don't know that they're necessarily a child predator. The interviewer, the person asking the question, often seems to pose it as naive that the husband would choose man. Numerically, it's uninformed to choose bear. Now, I'm calling this the best take, and I know that that is going to be pretty contentious on how many times I've put man here. Our nuance point for depth of how bad we're talking. I understand weighting your preference for yes, even if the bear attack's more likely, I'd choose it anyway. That's valid. Do at least bear in mind that you're selecting an encounter that is somewhere between 150 to 15,000 times more dangerous to avoid the worst case scenario. Totally not a bummer to think about those. There's our fun little chart. Last but not least, let's head inside and we'll do our conspiracy section. So now that we're done with our best take, let's move on to our conspiratorial edge. Okay, wait, I don't want to lose the fun outside vibe though. One sec. Oh, campfire mode. So this entire question, it's mostly just an excuse for people to scream at each other. The more I looked into it, the more it became clear to me that this is just brain rot. See, I smelled the other old fun internet questions in this. The Yanni versus Laurel, the what color's the dress, or wheels versus doors. Those were all fun and lighthearted. And if you dug into them, you'd get some fun little insight that you could take away and share with people. This one isn't really like that. This is pretending to be a logical question. It's barely distinguishable from man bad ? People trying to genuinely engage with this topic are falling for worse than just a snuck premise. The meme that we're looking at, this particular viral phenomenon, is just one of many tribal war dances. And because it looked like those old other memes, it seemed like this open-air forum for some of us to autistically wander in and be like, oh, hey guys, are we talking about bear facts here? I thought Grizzly Man was cool. No, it was never about that. This was just another instance of the internet becoming a stage for us to perform our beliefs for each other. See, with all the other memes, like, I couldn't tell you what you were going to say if I knew your politics. Like, if you have a Trump sticker on the back of your car, I don't know whether you heard Yanni or Laurel. It's like your stance on gun control didn't tell me whether you picked wheels or doors. But if you're a fan of The Handmaid's Tale, I know you picked bear. So what are we left with after all of this? I've just spent 30 minutes talking about a question that
mostly doesn't matter. Well, for those of us out there that do wander into conversations like this being overly genuine and logical, it's just a reminder that there are traps and pitfalls out there, and that not every public discourse is worth joining in. I probably stuck my neck out unnecessarily on that one. The thing we really learned today was that we got to kind of see a cool phenomenon. It's not the same that we were expecting, like with the other memes. Instead, we get to watch this like bubbling to the surface, like id versus id fight from like two large tribal components. And while we're in the more negative phase of the video, it makes sense that this came out of London. I looked up the statistics. There were like 1 million crimes in London last year. It was like 250,000 of them were violent crimes. Compare that with, combine every US national park, and over the last 17 years, I think we've had like 48 murders total. It's like, no wonder a bunch of Londoners thought it was gonna be so dangerous out there. My complaint there is, keep your city statistics out of my woods. If you wanna have some performative man-bad argument, why do you gotta drag down all the bears and outdoors people with you? Just reframe the debate as like, who would you rather run into in an alley, a child or a man? Like, just do that instead. I don't know. But one thing is true, it's a useful tool to find fun people. I think the kids call that a vibe check. It's like our opportunity to use this like large public tribal display as an opportunity to kind of stand around the outside of it and find more of us. The nerds who wandered in and started citing bear facts. That's a silver lining if there ever was one. And on that note, I'm sorry it's been a few months. I got distracted writing a meme coin trading bot to take money from kids. Don't worry about that, it didn't really work out. I might make a video on that someday. Anyway, I do want to try to upload once a month. However, in that time, we got a bunch of new views and subscribers. We passed 100. I super appreciate it. Like in one of the shorts past, I think 10,000 views. I'm super grateful for all of you watching. Like, thank you for taking the time. I'm going to keep doing more of this. I've got more fun ones planned. So thanks a ton, everyone, to watching. I hope none of you have any bad encounters with men or bears. And do me a favor, and on the way out, bear mace the like button for me. Why am I like this? See you next time. Bye.
By the way, I just left my phone way back on the trail where I sat down. That's gonna add some time to this hike. That's it. Oh, there it is. Can't believe I did that. Well, good job, Jim. See y'all next time.